Hello everyone, Kibler here. It has been a while since I have done one of these sort of state of the metagame videos for Hearthstone, but I think we can all agree that now is the time that we need to look at how things are going in the current standard metagame and evaluate what could be done differently. I think pretty much anyone who has been playing Standard Hearthstone recently has seen the omnipresence of Rogue everywhere, particularly in Higher Legend, where you see Thief and Thief Weapon Rogue as by far the most common decks. And for those of you who have watched my stream or my YouTube videos, the number of times you see a class that is not Rogue and say, oh, well, this is a Rogue because of Maestra, very, very high. So clearly, there's something going on in Standard, and I want to talk about how I think that we got here, what the sort of problems are, and how I would like to see Blizzard going about addressing them. There's already been announced that there will be a patch coming up on the 25th. I've seen a number of people say, oh, well, you know, it's so long, we have to wait another 2 weeks with Roguestone, why is this happening? And my understanding is that there basically wasn't an opportunity for them to reasonably do a significant balance patch with the scheduling they have for a major content release for Battlegrounds and other game modes that is coming on the 25th. So that's why we are basically waiting until then for any kind of changes. Also, I imagine there's the opportunity, while they may be able to collect data as to what should be changed, as to what the changes ought to be, if that makes sense. That's not necessarily as clear just by saying that something is wrong. So let's talk about it. Obviously, Rogue is public enemy number one right now in Standard Hearthstone. And sort of the biggest culprit is the Wild Paw Knoll decks. You have both the Thief Rogue, the sort of traditional Thief Rogue, as well as the Weapon Thief hybrid Rogue decks that are really abusing the interaction between Maestra and Wild Paw Knoll in order to just get Knolls down super early, be able to absolutely dominate the early board, put a ton of pressure on their opponent, and generally snowball games from there. And if they can't, they have these really powerful ways to both take the game back with things like scabs, as well as just close the game out. And I've talked a little about how I feel like one of the big issues in Hearthstone and in Hearthstone right now isn't necessarily just these specific cards, but the card draw that exists in Hearthstone. And I can already hear some of the people who I have I have discussed this with on social media who vociferously disagree with me, sort of groaning or preparing their angry tweets or whatever. But there's a lot of stats that people look at, right, when they look at what are the strongest cards? What are their drawn win rate, played win rate, mulligan win rate? But one of the things that you don't really see in a lot of statistical analysis of Hearthstone is how often you actually get to draw a card in a game, and at what point. One of the very important things for lots of decks is what I'll refer to as the deck velocity, which is how quickly it goes through the deck and finds its cards. And there's a very, very high velocity for a number of the most powerful decks in Standard right now. I've had multiple games against Poison Thief Rogue decks where my opponent has like 5 cards in their deck on like turn 7 or 8, right? Because the combination of Secret Passage and Swindle and Cutting Class and the Silverleaf Poison and all this stuff, in addition to tradable cards, which allows you to find more of these as the game progresses, gives you just this incredible ability to just churn through your deck and find all the pieces. And when people talk about how powerful Knoll is, or how powerful Scabs is, or how powerful any individual card is, one thing I think is missing from this sort of understanding is how often you see that individual card, right? Like, I remember back when, Leroy was nerfed, and I bring this example up a lot. When Leroy was nerfed back in, like, early Goblins versus Gnomes in the Hearthstone era, it was nerfed. It was like, it creates a strategy that, deals 20 damage or whatever from hand, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, Leroy could do that, but there are other ways to do that too. Like, Alec here, Double Rockbiter, right? That obviously wasn't as much damage as like Leroy, Shadow Step, Cold Blood, or whatever. But it was, 18 burst damage from hand for 10 mana, because Rockbiter used to be 1. And no one was bothered at all, right? Because Shaman couldn't consistently do that. Whereas Rogue, with Gadget Sand, with, whatever else, or Warlock with Life Tap, could. So the power level of a thing, and I discussed this in terms of what you can do versus how often you can do it. And a lot of people are saying, oh, the problem is just the mana discounts that exist. The problem are things like Knoll, or things like like Cutlass or things like Octobot, because these things mess with your mana. And that is obviously very powerful, right? There are two fundamental resources that I would say are the most important in Hearthstone, and it's mana and cards. You can do a certain thing based on the mana that you have or the mana that it costs. How often you can do that thing or how quickly you can do that thing is based on how easily and cheaply you draw cards. And I've seen people argue, oh, well, if Hearthstone didn't have card draw, it would be terrible, it would be so high. And it's like, well, I'm not saying there shouldn't be card draw, but what I'm saying is that it is very important to be careful about the quality and quantity of card draw that exists in any given deck at any given time, because we have things like Poison, Thief Rogue, that can draw through their entire deck consistently before they reach 10 mana. Same thing with a lot of Warlock decks, etc., etc., Mozaki Mage, Quest Mage, whatever. Obviously, I'm not suggesting that Quest Mage is a problem now, but it has been in the past prior to some of the nerfs. That is, in itself, something you need to be concerned about. So, I feel like there is this delicate equilibrium, right? And I've seen people say, well, they just shouldn't make cost reduction cards, because it's the cost reduction cards that cause these problems. And saying that you shouldn't mess with the mana resource system of the game cuts out so much interesting design space that I think that that's absolute nonsense to say you should never do anything that influences mana in a game that is built around a mana system. Complete nonsense. That's like a non-starter from a game design perspective. So what you need to do is be careful about both of these things, about how powerful your cost reduction effects, mana manipulating effects are, and how powerful your card draw effects are. There's a reason that both Black Lotus and Ancestor Recall are viewed as some of the most powerful Magic cards in the history of the game, because those are two of the most important resources, and they're two of the things that are best at breaking that resource system. So a big part of what makes these rogue decks so good is they can access these extremely powerful cards very quickly. You see early Gnolls so often, and you see Scabs on 7 so often, because these decks just churn through their decks between all the card draw that I was discussing. I don't know that specifically addressing any of these is really realistically what changes I would either hope to see or expect to see in an upcoming patch. The sort of systemic issue of there being card draw that is too cheap and too powerful is not something that's like, oh, well, let's hit Secret Passage, right? I think Secret Passage, by the way, has quietly been the best rogue card since it was released. It was nerfed once, still bananas powerful, and becomes more powerful with the addition of tradables, because you can Secret Passage, and if you miss things you can actually play, you can trade and keep those cards. And if you're using like a Cutlass, you're trading and keeping a mana discount as well, which is also bananas. So that, I think, all contributes to the power level of Rogue right now. And again, I don't necessarily think that what we're going to see are changes to any of the card draw effects, but I just want to sort of frame this because I think that is a huge contributor to the power level of Rogue right now that a lot of people aren't really paying attention to, aren't really looking at. Like, the fact that you can consistently assemble all of your cards to have like a one-turn kill combo by like turn 8, 9, 10 is a big part of the problem of the power level of these decks. So let's discuss what I actually do think we may see. I actually would hate to see Gnoll nerfed. And that's not because I don't think Gnoll is obviously a massive contributor to this, because I think Gnoll is basically paying for Maestra's sins. Gnoll, as a card, is a great way to reward a Thief Rogue deck. Gnoll, with Maestra, is stupid, because you're not actually rewarding you for playing Thief Rogue, you're rewarding you for playing card draw, which is already really good. So if you had to discount your Gnoll by playing 1 Thieves and Swashbucklers and Reconnaissances, you wouldn't be playing it for like 0 on turn 2 or 3 or whatever, because you're actually paying mana into getting that sort of discount and developing and doing actual Thief Rogue things rather than playing no Thief cards in your deck and just drawing cards to enable the mana discount on Gnoll like you do in the hybrid deck. So what I would love to see is the interaction between Maestra and Gnoll changed. I really dislike the fact that you just see all these decks like trading on 1, trading on 2, trade, okay, 0 cost Gnoll. So I think you could potentially change Maestra so it is when you play or trade a card that it reveals you, because that dramatically impacts the ability for you to have these early Gnolls at a cheap cost and makes it so that, yeah, the card is still doing its thing in a actual Thief deck, but is not just like coming down insanely early through no legitimate cost to you of actually playing cards that reduces cost. You're just drawing and getting cost reduction for drawing, which, as you're saying, already good. The Null Maester interaction you could completely take away too. You can make it so that Maester that Null says when you hit a when you draw a non-rogue class card, so, add a non-rogue class card to your hand rather than when you add a card of another class. Obviously, that's different from what we've seen all the sort of thief effects used previously, but it would allow you to keep Maester the same, depending on sort of the complexity or tech of changing Maestra in order to fix that interaction. And yeah, I think that would address that particular concern. Sort of the other concern outside of Maestra Null, and again, I think the problem is that interaction, not Null itself. I'd love for Null to stay the same so that if you actually are playing a Thief deck, it could be a powerful incentive to do that. It's not just busted because you're just like swindling or secret passaging and getting it for 0. I feel like the Poison Rogue deck generally is the more problematic of the two decks, because the nature of how it plays the game is so uninteractive. And there's a couple of elements to that. One is, of course, the sort of Scabs and Cloak, giving you just essentially 2 turns of total immunity with the Cloak, and then Scabs as like this really powerful bounce reset. I actually feel like Scabs is okay. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, Scabs is busted, Scabs is busted. Scabs is obviously really powerful, but I think Scabs is intentionally really powerful. And I think that, like, yes, you could maybe nerf it a little bit, and it would still be good. But I think that Scabs being, like, awesome and impressive and what it is right now is not problematic outside of the context of everything else the deck is doing. The problem isn't just that you can get this sort of immunity and ignore what your opponent's doing. The problem is that you can then go on to just easily kill them in a single turn. Some of that, again, is due to all the card draw that I was discussing and your ability to set your hand up over the course of the game and being able to use the Cloak and everything to buy yourself so much time to do that is extremely powerful. So you could address this in one of 2 ways, right? You could attack the sort of immunity protection element of it, or you could attack the 1-turn kill element of it. I actually like attacking the latter, because I think that the like, okay, I'm gonna poison swing at you stealth is actually pretty cool. The issue is more that you're just killing them from hand from like 40 life at just 10 mana, because Guild Trader plus Garrett, Wicked Stab is just 40 if you just immediately draw the bleeds. And that, I think, is the more problematic part of all of this. If Weapon Rogue were actually vulnerable to you killing their weapon because, hey, it's a weapon deck, not a 1-turn kill burst damage deck, then I think that it would actually be like a more interesting and compelling deck that didn't cause so much frustration. If you're cloaking, but you're still reliant on having to do things to your opponent, rather than just killing them from hand, the problem, in my mind, very frequently in Hearthstone, is the fact that you can just kill your opponent from hand in 1 turn so readily. And again, a huge part of that is the frequency with which you can do it because of the card draw, but part of it is just, okay, what can you do? There's a number of ways to address this. You could obviously hit like something like Garrett again, but I don't know about that. One of the cards that actually frustrates me the most is actually just Guild Trader. And this may seem like a strange target for animosity, but Guild Trader as a tradable card that is an incredibly powerful combo piece for these 1-turn kills, just it seems like very off to me. The fact that like these Thief Rogue decks, even the ones without Null, can get value out of Swindle to draw minions because they just trade those minions back into their deck, and then their combo piece can't even get hit by, say, like a Mutinous consistently because they can trade it back into their deck and only draw it the turn they're actually going to kill you, is a huge element of like what frustrates me about that sort of play pattern of the deck. I could even see just Guild Trader being changed to 1 spell damage, so rather than 2 spell damage, so you significantly cut the burst damage that it makes possible. I feel like the burst damage isn't just necessarily an issue in something like the Weapon Rogue deck. We've seen this obviously in Garrett Rogue before, the Field Contact deck, prior to the development of these other decks. You see it coming out of like Primordial Studies and like Burn Shaman, and causing these huge burst damage turns at very low cost. But it's obviously I think at its sort of peak in the Weapon Rogue deck, because you're able to access it so easily with Swindle and just keep getting value out of it through trading it throughout the game, and then so easily kill your opponent in a single turn, whether you use Scabs for the mana discount or Prep to just blow them up from hand with all that damage. So you could hit, like I said, you could hit Cloak, increase Cloak to 4 mana. I don't think that actually changes the play pattern of how a lot of the games play out, except against hyper-aggressive decks. Making the deck more vulnerable to hyper-aggressive decks is fine, but I think the play pattern of like, hey, I can do 40 from hand very regularly, and if you don't have massive amounts of armor, this deck really doesn't have tremendous interaction available to you, is a frustrating one. And I do want to say that I don't think these decks are unbeatable by any means. I actually have seen a lot of sentiment that, like, oh, you can't beat Rogue, it's not possible. It's like, well, I've actually been climbing significantly in fairly high Legend, like 300, 250 Legend with both N'Zoth Shaman and Control Warrior, and I was playing Wildfire Mage, just a matter of, like, finding ways to actually stop what they're doing, playing double Viper in every deck, having tons of ways to interact with early null, and then trying to find ways to keep your life total above 30 to 40, which is obviously very difficult, and I that's why I'm saying that I think that the one-turn kill element of Poison Rogue is actually the more concerning part to me than the immunity element, because it dramatically reduces the number of viable strategies you can attempt to play to try and beat it. You basically have to have a way to get tremendous amounts of armor, whether it's like being a warrior, or playing like Bulnar plus Arbor Vendors, or playing like all of the Deepwater Evokers and things like that to get your armor total up alongside Ice Barrier to keep your life total high, etc., etc. Which is how I've built these decks that I've used to combat these things, but you can't really play like Priest, right? Priest is like completely non-viable as any kind of control strategy when your opponents can easily 40 you from hand. And changing Cloak doesn't change that. Maybe it makes it more vulnerable to hyper-aggressive decks because you can't Cloak as cheaply, but still fundamentally retains the play pattern of that person ignoring what you do, drawing their entire deck and 40ing you from hand if you don't kill them super quickly. Yeah, those are sort of what I would like to see, what I would expect to see. Changes to Maestra. I would hope to see some sort of change to, as I said, to the one-turn kill component rather than the immunity bounce component of Scabs and Cloak, but I could see that kind of going either way. And then I do think that I'd love to see some sort of change to the other one-turn kill deck that is kind of prominent in Standard and will become much more prominent if we do see Rogue go the wayside as particular Poison Rogue, which is Mozaki Mage. I feel like the Mozaki Mage has very much the same characteristics of Poison Rogue in terms of, hey, I look to just kind of accelerate through the velocity that I have to draw my entire deck with 4 powerful card draw effects, Refreshing Springwater and Cram Session and Multicaster and Arcane Intellect. It's probably in like descending order of bustedness, but whatever. It's not necessarily a matter of any individual one of those cards being too powerful, but having them all in the same shell ensures that you find things like the Incanter Slows to reduce your deck, and then ultimately your Mozaki and all your kill components much more quickly. And there's a number of ways you can attack this. You could just nerf Incanter Slow again, which I think is okay. I'd actually just kind of like to see Mozaki itself potentially nerfed. I think that Mozaki being more expensive, say costing 7 mana, would make it so that you can't just play it before your opponent could possibly mutinous you and win the game, and obviously just make your sort of mana breakpoints of what you need to do in order to actually be able to combo off more demanding for the aggressive matchups. Like I said, similar to the Poison Rogue deck, there's a number of ways that you can attack this. You can attack... I don't think you can realistically attack the card draw. There's no individual offender. So you can attack the cost reduction or the win condition, right? And the cost reduction being Counter Slow has already been nerfed once. I think is not offensive necessarily in some of the other Spell Mage decks that we can potentially still see. And that with the win condition of Mozaki is really the major problem. Well, I mean, they're both problems, right? And you could hit both of them. But I think that the real issue is the fact that, yes, you kill your opponent in one turn so quickly. I've died like turn 6, turn 7 very frequently against Mozaki decks. And just bumping the cost of Mozaki itself up would at least delay that to the point that people who choose to play tech cards against you, like Mutinous, have a chance, and obviously slows you down significantly in terms of your ability to go off against aggressive decks as well. So, and I have heard, at least, there may be other targets for balance changes. Those are the ones that really concern me right now. I do think that there's a portion of the audience that feels like, say, Quest Warrior is oppressively powerful in lower ranks, and I think that is understandable. We saw like Quest Warrior get multiple buffs prior to the release of a lot of more powerful stuff for it, and I think that we saw one of those buffs reverted. I could potentially see the freebooter, the 3/4 getting reverted as well, or maybe the number of pirates required to do it increase. I don't think the deck is oppressive in any way in higher ranks, but it is the sort of thing that creates frustrating play patterns in the lower ranks, and could see the deck change for that reason, which frankly wouldn't really influence high level play that much anyway, because it doesn't really see that much play at higher ranks, regardless. So anyway, that I think is sort of my overview of where I see the standard format right now and the things that I would like to see changed. I don't really think anything has to happen to Quest Warrior, but I wouldn't mind seeing something happen to at least placate those who are frustrated playing against it at lower ranks at such a high frequency. But I do think that obviously Rogue needs to be hit, and I think if Rogue is hit, Mage does need to be hit in some way. I am interested in hearing your thoughts about what you think the problems are, as well as your thoughts on sort of my framing of the problem of sort of card draw and deck velocity and how that relates to the current power level of the various Rogue decks and of Mage, which I think are notably the sort of most problematic decks in the current format at relatively high ranks. So anyway, thank you all very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time.